Welcome to Noisy Mind Podcast.
Glad to be here.
Today we're looking at something really fascinating, I think. It's how immigrants have shaped the actual look, the architecture of New York City over the years.
Yeah, it's a huge topic, and we've got some interesting sources lined up to help us explore it. Different angles, different periods.
Right, we've got economic reports, some historical accounts, things from the American Irish Historical Society, even a draft plan on fair housing. Quite a mix.
It is. The idea is to pull out the key insights from all of these, see what story they tell together about the city's buildings and who built them.
Okay, let's get into it then. Where should we start? Maybe those early waves of immigration. How did they first start changing the physical city?
Good starting point. Well, one source, the Journal of the American Irish Historical Society, it points out that significant Irish immigration started, maybe noticeably, around 1718.
1718. Okay, so quite early.
Yeah, initially Presbyterian families. But then later, especially after American independence, you see a much larger wave, mostly Catholics arriving.
And these early arrivals, they weren't just passive residents, were they? The journal mentions some pretty prominent figures.
Absolutely. Even before the Revolutionary War, you had influential Irish figures in New York's commercial life, in real estate. People like Sir Peter Warren.
Ah, Warren Street. I always wondered.
Exactly, named after him. And other successful merchants, the Wallaces, the Mulligans, McCormick mentioned too. These were significant property holders, business leaders.
So they were directly shaping the city through, like, buying land, building businesses.
Precisely. Their investments, their commercial activities, they would have influenced the early physical layout. Maybe the types of buildings needed for trade, where streets went. It wasn't just random growth.
And it wasn't only the elite, right? I imagine there was a lot of labor involved in actually building the city.
Oh, definitely. The journal points that out too. A huge number of Irish immigrants were involved in construction, in labor generally.
Makes sense. You need people to actually, build things.
Right. They give an example, the Illinois and Michigan Canal. Now, that's not New York City, obviously, but it shows the kind of massive infrastructure projects that Irish immigrant labor made possible in the U.S.
So we can infer a similar crucial role in New York itself, building docks, warehouses, streets, housing.
It's a very strong inference, yes. Even if our specific NYC historical sources don't detail every single construction crew, the labor had to come from somewhere. And these immigrant groups were a major source.
And that ties into the bigger picture, doesn't it? You look at those economic reports, even the recent ones.
Well, the recent ones show fluctuations, like a dip in non-residential building after 2020, maybe due to remote work trends.
Right, but historically, you'd expect construction booms to often align with periods of high immigration, wouldn't you? Just meeting the demand.
Absolutely. Providing that essential workforce and also creating the demand for housing and infrastructure, it's a cycle. The city physically grew because people were arriving.
Okay, so they provided the labor, the demand, and some early leadership. What about architectural styles? Did any groups bring specific aesthetics or building types with them?
That's the tricky part, at least based on these specific sources. They don't really say the Irish introduced this specific type of roofline or something like that.
So it's more subtle.
It seemed so. It's more about the demand they created.
Mm-hmm.
The sheer number of people arriving at different times meant the city needed certain kinds of buildings, tenements, for example, or particular types of shops or community centers.
So the need shaped the form rather than a direct import of a style.
Largely, yes. Though you could argue that the way communities clustered might have led to localized adaptations. Think about how neighborhoods develop a certain feel.
Ah, okay. And the housing plan source, the Where We Live NYC draft, does it to touch on that? Neighborhood character.
It does, but often through the lens of segregation, unfortunately. It shows those historical redlining maps.
Right, I saw that figure. Shocking stuff.
It is. It shows how neighborhoods, often heavily populated by specific immigrant groups, Southern Europeans, Jewish immigrants were explicitly labeled as declining or even hazardous.
Which meant what? Less investment, harder to get loans.
Exactly. It directly discouraged investment and made it harder for residents to buy or improve property. So, while a neighborhood might develop a distinct character due to its population, discriminatory policies actively shaped how it developed, or sometimes how it declined.
So any distinct architectural character in those areas might be a result of both the community's needs and the external forces like redlining limiting resources.
That's a very good way to put it. A complex interplay. It wasn't just about cultural preferences being built. It was also about what was possible under often discriminatory conditions.
Let's shift a bit to the social and political side. We have that historical account, the Great Riots of New York. It details some pretty intense
Yes,
periods.
it does. It gives a sense of the tensions that existed. None of the riots mentioned are specifically about architecture, obviously.
No, but they provide context, right? The backdrop against which the city was being built and lived in.
Definitely. Take the draft riots in 1863. Huge event, sparked by conscription during the Civil War, but it had deep roots in ethnic and class tensions.
And that kind of upheaval must have left physical marks on the city, and certainly affected where people felt safe, where communities formed or reformed.
Without a doubt. Physical damage in some areas, sure, but also reinforcing social divisions, maybe accelerating shifts in where different groups lived. It all feeds back into the urban landscape.
And linking back to that fair housing plan, the redlining wasn't just historical, its effects linger.
Profoundly. That practice of classifying neighborhoods based on race and ethnicity directly influenced who got mortgages, who could build wealth through property, which areas received investment for decades.
And the plan today is trying to address that legacy, promote more equitable development.
That's the stated goal, yes. Ensuring equitable access to housing, amenities, opportunities, regardless of the neighborhood's demographics.
Which, thinking architecturally, could mean investing in preserving the heritage of previously neglected areas, or perhaps fostering new, more integrated styles.
Both are possibilities. Addressing the historical inequities could unlock resources for preservation, but also shape future development patterns as the city aims for greater integration. It's an ongoing process.
So even if immigrants didn't always bring, say, specific blueprints for buildings, their cultural presence must have shaped the city's needs and feel.
Absolutely. Think about the establishment of cultural organizations. The American Irish Historical Society, founded back in 1897, is a great example mentioned in their journal.
Right, these groups create a focal point for communities.
Exactly. They need spaces, meeting halls, libraries, eventually maybe museums or cultural centers. Religious institutions, too, are huge architectural markers for different communities. Even just the way businesses cater to specific groups can influence storefronts or market halls.
And the leaders within these communities. The journal mentions prominent members of the historical society.
Yes. Even if they weren't architects themselves, these influential figures, business owners, politicians, community leaders, they would have had a say in the city's development through civic involvement, through philanthropy, through their own businesses. Their priorities would have shaped parts of the built environment.
It's a much broader influence than just design, then. It's about presence, community building, economic activity.
And fighting for their place in the city, too, which sometimes meant overcoming significant prejudice, as the redlining history shows. All of this leaves an imprint.
And museums, like the Museum of the City of New York mentioned in one report, play a role in keeping these complex stories alive.
They do. By documenting the city's social history, activist movements, the lives of diverse communities, they help us understand the context behind the buildings we see. The architecture is like a physical record of all that history.
So wrapping this up, it seems clear that New York's architecture is just fundamentally inseparable from the stories of the immigrants who came here.
Absolutely. From the very beginning, with early Irish merchants and laborers, right through successive waves and the ongoing impact of social policies and community efforts, it's all woven together.
Yeah, what really strikes me is how it's not just one thing. It's the economy, it's social dynamics, it's policy, it's the sheer presence and drive of these communities,
Right.
all shaping the bricks and mortar.
It's a constant evolution. The city's built environment isn't static. It reflects these ongoing processes.
Which leaves us with a big question for you listening. As New York keeps changing, keeps welcoming new people, and as the city continues to grapple with housing equity, how will that shape its architectural future?
What will the next layer of architectural history look like? What styles, what neighborhood forms will emerge from today's migrations and social goals? It's fascinating to consider.
Definitely something to think about. If you found this look at immigrant influence on NYC's architecture interesting, please do like, share, and subscribe to the Noisy Mind podcast channel.
We'll be back with more exploration soon.